Hey, I'm John Cannell, and today on Preppy Kitchen, we're making some amazing pumpkin scones. So let's get started. First off, set your oven to 400 degrees. It needs to be nice and toasty. Grab half a cup or 113 grams of cold butter, and we're gonna cut this into small pieces, and then pop that into the freezer. This needs to be ice cold. We're skipping the chill time for this recipe, but the trade-off is everything that goes in has to be nice and cold. And if you're a fan of Pumpkin's Starbucks scones, get ready because these are so much better. Sorry, Starby. That's what it's called, Starbies. I make my coffee at home, but I will not lie and tell you that I don't fantasize about a Trenta iced coffee every now and again. And by every now and again, I mean every day.
Trenta? It's huge.
It's just like a bucket of iced coffee. Ooh, with a little chip ice. All right. My butter's cubed into small pieces. This goes into the freezer. My freezer's over there. To hang out while we make the rest of the recipe. Grab a big bowl and some flour. I'm adding 2 1/4 cups or 270 grams of all-purpose flour. That's the same amount of flour that's in my waffle recipe. I'm also adding in 1/4 cup or 50 grams of granulated sugar, 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder to puff it all up. For the spices, I'm adding in 1 1/2 teaspoons of cinnamon and 1 1/2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice. I make my own every year, so I have like a big batch just at the ready. You can buy it too, but when you make your own pumpkin pie spice, you can really control the flavors and add in all the things you love. Like I love to have a little bit of cardamom in mine and some more allspice, but the world is your oyster here. It's your flavor combination and it's good in almost everything this fall. I'm also adding in 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. The pumpkin and the brown sugar are slightly acidic, so they'll react with the baking soda and puff things up just a little bit more. Grab a whisk. Our scale is done. Just mix that together. You want to have a nice, even distribution of spices, salt, and leavening agents. All right. Now we can set that aside and get onto the wet ingredients in a slightly smaller bowl. It's time to measure out 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree. If you want to use your own homemade pumpkin puree, you can go ahead and do that. Just make sure it has a really smooth consistency and isn't too watery. I will say if you're gonna buy pumpkin puree, I do like to use Libby's. It has a beautiful color and it's just the right texture. Not too watery, not grainy at all. So that's 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree or 122 grams right into my bowl. I also want 1/2 cup or 120 mils of cold cream. Nice and rich. So marshmallows help keep your brown sugar nice and moist, especially if it's an open container or an opened container, but I'm at the very bottom of my canister. It's like nothing but marshmallows. So that's 1/4 cup or 55 grams of brown sugar. You could use light or dark. It's really whichever one you prefer. And finally, 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. This is some homemade stuff and it's so good. That recipe is on the channel, by the way. Almost forgot 1 egg. In you go. It'll help hold things together. Now we're gonna give this a quick whisk. Whisk that together. The color is gorgeous. These pumpkin scones are gonna have the perfect pumpkin color as well. I'm setting that aside and now it's time to grab butter, which has been chilling in the freezer for about 10 minutes so it's nice and firm. This gets worked directly into your flour and you can do this with a pastry cutter or by hand. It's up to you. Add your butter directly into the flour. I'm using my clean hands to mix this together and just mush the butter up into smaller pieces. Full disclosure, I had to take a phone call and this was in the freezer for a little bit longer than it should have. Really 10 minutes is just the right amount, otherwise your butter gets too hard. I like doing this by hand because you can kind of work the butter into smaller pages. And that way you can have different sizes of butter. Sometimes when you use a pastry blender, the butter can just be kind of uniformly chopped or you don't realize you're cutting it too small. You need to have some big chunks of butter to give you those nice flaky moments. If your hands run cold, it's the perfect moment for you. If you have hot little hands, pastry blender, or you can use forks or knives to break the butter up. Okay, I have some nice pea-sized pieces of butter in here. It's actually really fun and relaxing to do this. These scones are delicious as is, but there are so many things you could enjoy. Try 1/2 cup of crystallized ginger, chocolate chips, toasted pecans or walnuts. So many things are gonna be really delightful in here and it's totally up to you. Make it your own. Now it's time to get the pumpkin mixture into the flour. Just pour it in Stir the pumpkin mixture just until there's no streaks of flour. You don't want to overmix because that'll change the texture and activate some proteins that you don't want, like gluten. Okay. I am dreaming of taking a bite of these with that glaze on top. They're perfect. Okay. And just like that, all the flour has disappeared and it's time to pat these out. Grab some flour because we need to have a well-floured surface to work on. This dough is very sticky. I'm using a pastry mat because it's like just foolproof. There's never gonna be a problem when you work in a pastry mat because if this room suddenly became 20 degrees hotter and everything was melty, I would just lift this up, put it in the fridge and come back, problem solved. No scraping off the counter. Get all of that onto the counter. Flour your hands well. And you're gonna pat this into an 8-inch square. This is an excellent moment for a bench scraper because it really does a good job of lifting the dough off. I'm gonna add some more flour underneath. My handy pastry mat is also telling me exactly what 8 inches is because of the markings on it. I love that. Once you have your square all done up, we're gonna cut this into quarters. Find the center. I will be using my measuring tape for this. There, nice. Now we're gonna cut this into quarters. And then cut those quarters into triangles. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Transfer your scones directly onto a lined baking sheet. Just carefully lift them up with your bench scraper and set them aside. They're very delicate at this stage. Last one's on, and I have to tell you, these will be so good if you give them 20 to 30 minutes of chill time. You want the butter to really set up so they can puff up high instead of just melting to the side. So 20 to 30 minutes in the freezer, and if you wanted to, you could freeze them solid and bake them later. Just add more time for baking. In you go. Once they're out of the freezer, brush the tops lightly with heavy cream, and then they're ready to go into the oven. My scones are ready to go into the oven, 400 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes. 20 will be a softer scone, 25 is more crisp, and if you're baking from completely frozen, 25 plus. In these go, and while they bake, we're gonna make our delicious glaze. For our icing, you have a couple choices. You could go classic, or you could go pumpkin spice, or both. 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, that's 180 grams, and 2 tablespoons of milk. 1. Let's drizzle it right over, and 2. Give this a quick mix. That's a beautiful consistency, perfect for drizzling. If you want to have the Starbucks signature look, add a 1/4 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice and 1 tablespoon of pumpkin puree. My scones are out of the oven and they've cooled. It's time to drizzle them with that delicious icing. If you want that Starbucks copycat look, cover the top completely in your plain icing, then drizzle the pumpkin over the top. That is perfectly sweet, lots of pumpkin flavor and all the spices are coming through, and the texture is nice and soft on the inside with a crisp, buttery edge. And that frosting just puts it over the top. I hope you get a chance to make this recipe, and if you like this video, check out my breakfast treat playlist.